Today, like we said, we are going to be working with on something that we think is a really important aspect to what we do here, and that is to work with our Faith Forward group. The Carter Center has dedicated a person that you're going to hear from today that's going to talk about that. But I have to just say this, as many of you know, we had a pretty challenging year, didn't we? 2024 is a pretty interesting year. And all of the things that went on, we tried to bring in high level uh, presenters that could come and talk with us, everything about how to take care of ourselves, how to work with difficult folks, have everything about how election results came out, things even before the elections. We did a variety of things trying to bring people that have a lot of expertise to come and speak to you. We think it's important to bring very high quality folks so that when you come to this lunch and learn, you can hear from them, learn from them. And then as we are working, it's not just around elections anymore. Now we are moving our attention around certainly free, fair, safe, and secure elections. That's important. But now it's about the effort in our society of how we begin to have conversations one with another and that we become instruments of peace. And I believe that's really important. In fact, if you go back and understand the very foundation of what Jimmy Carter, Rosalind Carter, the Carter Center did when he got out of being president was to go over into other areas of the country and the world and to work for peace. And so, again, they have a robust organization that does a lot of that. In fact, some of our leaders in this organization that what we work with here have been, I don't see Nathan, well, I do see Nathan on. Nathan Stock has worked in places like China and the Gaza Strip. And now he helps us head up this work here. Why? Because we believe that with a lot of the division that we've heard about here in America, it's time for mature adults to begin to have conversations about how we work together and how we work for peace. And so we'll continue to work in the election process and making sure we do things right there. But now we're going to move to a greater conversation over the next couple of years about how we really begin to have conversations one with another. Now, you should think that, yes, we deal with politics, and that's controversial enough. And you deal with business folks, and that's controversial, and philosophical issues, that's controversial. You say, okay, well, at least when we get the faith world, we'll all be together. Not necessarily. In fact, maybe, and Tom and I were talking about this, maybe there's more division when you talk about faith than anywhere. And you have to really be able to come to sort of get to the key point of why a person holds to their faith and what it means. But we should all be what Matthew 5:9 says, is that blessed are the peacemakers, for they are the children of God. And so I would think that our desire is to be peacemakers. And so that's one of the things that we're going to work on. And I will tell you, there's a practical element to this. As we're talking about it, there's a practical aspect. You're going to hear from Tom and about the efforts that we're doing across the United States now, and I guess across the world in some respects. But then we're going to come back to you. We're going to break out into some rooms, and we're going to ask you to help us be able to do more and more engagement with the faith community. We'll talk about that. And then we'll close out our time today with giving you an opportunity to talk to us and to tell us what you'd like to hear in the future, because we're going to be building the plan for 2025. We're actually working on it now to what would be some of the great training. So put all that in your bonnet, get ready to go in, and I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, and Lisa's going to introduce Tom. Lisa?
Hello, forgive me for sounding like Kermit the Frog, but I have a cold and this is what it is. And forgive me for reading, but Tom he has a great bio and I want to make sure I don't miss anything. He is the project advisor for the Carter Center Conflict Resolution Program. He works on conflict prevention, peace building, peacemaking, which means he must get along with everybody really well. He helps to manage the Carter Center's efforts to strengthen resilience and trust in the U.S. electoral process and system, focusing on supporting faith leaders to address polarization and division. Prior to this, he worked for almost 3 decades to support the Carter Center and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter's efforts to end conflict, promote peace, and strengthen democracy around the world, including North Korea, Ethiopia, the Great Lakes region of East Africa, China, Sudan, Uganda, almost everywhere. Tom developed a managed a long-term community justice program in Liberia starting in 2004, but before beginning the work in the United States in 2020. He has a master's degree in Irish political studies from Queen's University of Belfast, and has conducted doctoral work of ethno-national conflict at London School of Economics and Emory University. He's a trained mediator and a recent adjunct faculty member of Emory University School of Law. He's our colleague, well-respected, well-loved, and a friend. So I'm going to pass it over to Tom.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Kirk, and good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute delight to be with you, to be talking to Florida. I've been in Georgia for the last 30 years, but my wife is from West Palm Beach, and so we packed the car every summer and drove down to West Palm Beach, which I still don't understand why we did that, hopping from the burning hot sand to the air conditioning with the toddlers. But I'm very happy to be here with you, and I want to own that I feel, particularly in the company of Kurt and Lisa, and I'm sure many of you who do a lot of work in faith communities and have done all your life. I want to own that I feel a little bit of an imposter talking about faith forward, other than from the context of peace building and peacemaking. This is not a conversation, in my mind at least, about what faith is about in any way, other than at the highest common levels, but it's more a conversation about how we can mobilize faith leaders and create spaces and resources and comfort for them to help address these common problems we have and get to the common goals that all of the resilience networks have. So let me sort of briefly walk you through the journey I've been on as part of this effort to harness the tremendous power of faith leaders, both leaders and laity. And my origins come to this through Northern Ireland, through 3 years that I spent in Belfast in a active sectarian war between Catholic nationalists and Protestant unionist loyalists, who, to my eyes, I couldn't tell the difference between them. I'm from England and have sort of no Irish blood. But the level of the animus was such that there was no space in the middle. There was no space for the vast majority of people in the province who were interested in peace and not fighting, but they had all got locked into the question of sort of which side are you on. They got locked into the zero-sum logic of conflict. And that is one of the big driving concerns that the Carter Center brings to our efforts, is observing similar phenomena evolving in the US. When we talk about polarization, we are talking about having much harder time talking to people on the other side, making presumptions about people who are different from us, not being able to listen because we assume that they are somehow against us. All these phenomena that I know you've talked about in your earlier meetings. And I had the great pleasure of privilege of meeting a Northern Irish peace builder about half a dozen years ago, Reverend Gary Mason, who some of you may have heard speak. And we had a coffee to meet each other right after the Charlottesville right to March, I forget the exact title, event. And we looked at each other and we said, this is not healthy. This is not good. the sort of the symbols that were on display, the animus that was on display, the violence, the marching, the sort of the post fallout of this was something that was extremely familiar to he and I from the time in Northern Ireland. And so we're driven by the opportunity to prevent the gaps between us getting any wider. And I think faith communities have a tremendous role to play in that. Why faith communities? I've got some slides that'll go through on that, but in the initial conversations, it was almost always the case that when we talk to somebody of faith, they recognized immediately the dilemma we were trying to describe. In the very early days when we talked about concern about violence, people didn't quite understand that. But then when we talked about sort of division and polarization, faith leaders are living that in their congregations every day. They're being asked to guide people who are in division, and they are themselves trying to avoid polarizing or having to be extremely careful with their own leadership. And so that sort of evolved, and let me see if I can share my screen here, into a sort of primary. Let's see if we're moving down here. We're not. Yeah. This led into sort of a primary question of how can people of faith help to heal our nation, and how can we use our places of worship as places of healing? The fundamental that we were trying to focus on is the question of disagreement. And for a healthy society, we're always going to disagree. Conflict is natural. It's how we resolve that sets aside healthy societies from unhealthy ones. And so in order to live well, we need to disagree well. And in order to disagree well, we need to understand each other well. And I think this is a major characteristic of polarizing societies, that understanding is driven by those who have the microphone, rather than by direct contact and understanding and listening and relationships. There is a fundamental assumption that faith is a positive in this context, that it can ease divisions, and that faith leaders have the power to bridge divides and inspire positive change. We need to recognize also that the reverse is true, not only historically, but also in our current society, that faith leaders have a tremendous ability for negative action, for divisiveness, for justifying the unjustifiable. And so it's appealing to the better angels of our natures that is part of what we're trying to do here. When Kurt says sort of blessed are the peacemakers as a fundamental core value, adding to that we are all God's children, and that to love thy neighbor is the second highest command. So those three messages of love and unity are central to how we're trying to help people think about healing. So faith leaders, can be key leaders in transformation. The transcendent purpose they have, with appealing to higher powers of peace. The concern is that politics is such a strong grip on our hearts that the grip of our sacred texts should be stronger. These are eternal messages, while politics sort of exists in the temporal world. Times change, but principles are unchanging. There's real institutional power to faith communities. Less and less in our societies do we have places where we come together and actually meet directly, either the workplace, social clubs, sports clubs, and faith communities remain one of the largest spaces where we come together in mass, but we also have the capacity to come together in small groups and define, our agenda for conversation. And that's, I think, a very powerful thing. We can't, it's very hard to change yourself, but if you connect with a trusted group and you expand that trusted group, then change is quite possible. Working within a community that shares your views. We have moral and ethical commitments as people of faith. We're not, we're taught to look out for other people's interests, to do as we would be done by. And then the question of, what do we want written on our tombstones? That we were great partisans or great healers or great peacemakers, and to keep these in mind. The words we know have tremendous power. We use them to dehumanize. If you keep your ears open, the insults are ratcheting up. There's always a race to more extreme language, and the more extreme the language, the more easy it is to dehumanize, and dehumanization precedes violence. We have the ability to challenge that kind of language and choose to use humanizing rhetoric. This for me, and I know you've had previous sessions on the psychology of polarization. This is one of the places where I think we can have the greatest human connectivity, because everybody understands that they are more angry now than they were 5 or 10 years ago. Everybody understands that they are sort of triggered when they see something in social media. And this is a neurophysiological product of the information environment that we're living in. When you are under stress, and that's what these sort of messages that are designed to create emotion are, you have the sort of a hardening of the ability to think empathetically, increased threat perception, lower trust, decreased nuance. Your intragroup empathy goes up, and your intergroup empathy decreases. Polarization is generally, very bad for our mental health, and that provides a point of commonality. Collectively, we want to live in a healthy civic society. We want to live in a society that is guided by the messages of love and health and community. And if you can see how the polarization works, you can start to work against it. And that's one of the the important pieces of a presentation like this. We want to find ways to manage this division, to sort of rehumanize, if that's a word, to understand that we are living in this poor information environment, and find ways to sort of circumnavigate that without judgment. Our congregations live in this toxic information environment. We need to be aware that not all of our leaders have the general interest in at the forefront of their minds, and challenge people to think about, is what they're seeing in the media taking them in a healthy direction or an unhealthy direction. We live in a place where everything is being portrayed as a sort of an existential threat, as an attack on our very being, and this really isn't the case. That because it's things are the world is a complicated place, and the more that we are driven to think of things in black and white, in zero-sum terms, the harder it is to connect with each other as a society. So what can faith leaders do? We understand these dynamics, take risks within our comfort zones, if that's not an oxymoron. The faith forward effort is not trying to ask anybody to change their faith. We're not trying to ask anybody to change their political views. We're not even asking people to sort of reach out and kumbaya with other faiths. We're just asking people to do what they can within their context to lift up the challenges of division, acknowledge that these are negative forces, and try to work as they can. And there's many different ways that this can be done. But the first step is to accept this and own this. So in some senses, this effort is a challenge to faith leaders, so they can take courageous action, but not too courageous if that's not where the comfort zones are. You've heard from other speakers, I'm sure, about the sort of strategies for using your personal, your greatest personal asset is your relational capital. And so reaching out to neighbors, humanizing, listening, moving from the path of anger to love, embrace difficult conversations, and above all, sort of look at ourselves first. We can't transform unless we understand how these things operate within our own lives. This slide was produced as we were thinking through this whole process, and indeed this whole slide deck is meant not so much as a roadmap, but as a conversation starter. It usually appears with some like draft for comment on it. So when you say you're working on faith stuff and people look at you suspiciously and say, well, what do you mean? I'm a Baptist over here and you're an Episcopalian over there. What in the world have we got to talk about? This is the kind of thing we try to share. And the practical activities are, there is skill training you can have for having these difficult conversations. Where in the world do I start? You can learn lessons from other communities, both sort of near, and in our case, we've used Belfast and Gary's learning, and we've sent learning tours over there to really sort of try to understand where they went wrong, where they came back from the brink, and how we can build that into preventing things getting worse here. Consciously and deliberately reaching out to find allies to support and expand the effort. This doesn't have to be allies who are far away from you in your thinking, your beliefs, your ideology. And in fact, that's probably a very difficult and challenging thing to do. You're trying to more like it's building small groups and groups of groups who are all moving in the same direction, but still will have the difficulty in communicating with each other. That's perfect if so long as people are doing the work. Again, the value of small group discussions and being deliberate in this work. We have in practical terms to operationalize this, done many things, and Kurt and Lisa have been very active in all of this. A core one is a sort of a days of prayer that we've had twice now, just to ask congregations to find space to say a sample prayer for our nation, to adapt the prayer for their congregations, to publicize that. Lisa did some great work getting mayors and civic leaders to sort of publicize the days of prayer, bringing people together in services of prayer and interfaith services, webinars, trainings. We've had around the elections, we had an interfaith clergy sort of intervention task force for instances of violence. We had clergy visiting polling centers so they could go back and educate their own communities. We've had private conversations galore. A lot of sort of legwork, trust building, confidence building has been part of the work to help people to lift up what they are committed to already as faith leaders, and help them to be part of a common effort to support the our democratic republican and those values. So I'm sure there's a lot too much that I've said and a lot that I haven't said, but let me leave that there and turn it back over to Kurt. So thank you so much.
Well, Tom, first of all, thank you guys. Let me just take this here. We're going to break out into groups. I want you to discuss kind of, at least here, what you heard. If we opened it up for everyone right now, it would probably take too long. I'd like to get to, if you get thrown into a group, if you would do a couple of things for us. Number one, get somebody that's sort of the scribe that will help us as we're sort of capturing what the group says. Maybe discuss what you learned out of this. But here's the real thing that we're looking for. How do we go into our own world, our faith community, and bring more people engaging this? I do believe what Tom is working on is a very critical component to being able to be reasonable people, having reasonable conversations with voice of reason, and bringing them together under the auspices of loving one another and working for peace. So we're going to break out into rooms. And if you don't mind, I know there's several folks that had to get off the call a little bit early, but if you don't mind, do this, go into it. We're going to give you about 5 minutes. That's it, to kind of talk about it and make sure you get everybody as much as they'd like to say some stuff. Come back, and then we're going to just come back and take a few of these ideas. How do we better engage what are people of faith, people who have compassion and understanding in our society? How do we get them greater involved, right? That's an important question for us, and I think you are the ones that help us answer that. So let's break out into the rooms if you don't mind.
We were having a great talk with Samuel, who I think is still on.
Yeah, and I want to say the same thing. We were just getting rocking and rolling in our group, but we wanted to come back. We had great conversations. Let's do this. I don't even know how many groups we had. Lorianne, you can tell us, but I'm going to start. I know that Liz was in ours, and we'll call our group one, whatever it is. Liz, can you just give us a real synopsis of kind of the essence of the conversation we had?
Sure. I really don't know if I captured it well, but I think first Sharon Joy commented that that bringing a network of networks together is what she does. So it's not just the religious community. It's other organizations throughout communities, throughout Florida and beyond. And she said that it was courageous for the Carter Center to be responsive to non-Democrats when some of this earlier work began, and that a charter of compassion is something that sounds like a central phrase that would work beyond a lot of the words that we use to identify religious pursuits. It's compassion. And she actually lives in St. Pete, which has a nickname now of the City of Compassion. And then Kurt mentioned that it's not just religious institutions, but all institutions, which supported what Sharon Joy said. And Martha said that the faith communities are really trying to engage themselves at this point. They're struggling on their own. And so it's good to look outside of those borders and realize that there are challenges within that realm. And that's all the notes that I captured.
And I have to apologize, Ms. Fernandez. We know you wanted to speak and we got cut off, but thank you for all of the engagement. You did a good job. Lisa, we'll go to your group.
Who was taking notes in my group was Helen.
There was some talk about just being out and about in the community and in the grocery store and at lunch with friends and bringing up the conversation in a natural kind of organic setting, and just opening up the lines of communication there. The main focus of ours was to engage the pastor. The pastor, being the head of the congregation, has a pulse on his congregation, and the challenge was to get them more involved, to challenge the pastor, to challenge the congregation to become more involved. Mr. Picard, who is a pastor, jumped in at that point and, gave us a little bit of an antithesis to that, in that the pastor is a lot of times hesitant to speak about conflict in congregation because he doesn't want to alienate any of his people. So we were just kind of getting into that when time ran out.
Yeah. And by the way, I think that's probably a good point. Again, I've pastored a church as well, and a lot of times we leave it to the pastor to want to confront this, but it really is better when it comes from the folks in the organization and congregation. Two reasons. Number one, otherwise they just come and sit and soak in a church. Sometimes you want people active. You want them to come and get engaged. I did. And we always tried to find ministries to be involved in. Secondly, they are out in the community. And so this is how we're going to expand it. But I do love pastors are shepherders. They're responsible to shepherd their flock, and they should have a compassion and a heart for that. And so I do appreciate it. But we also need to take heed and be concerned about them as well, and not just leave it to them. And I think back to Sharon Joyce, the network of networks. Dadgum, that's a good term. I like that. That's really important. Was there another group? Because I couldn't tell how many groups we had. Was there another group? Somebody?
Yes, Tom had a group.
Okay, Thomas.
Okay. Well, had some positive comments on the presentation, which I appreciated, and that it was stimulating for thought. Had Mr. Rawlins was talking about anti-gun violence initiative that he has in Miami area, and how we talked about that, and in the context of sort of bridge building and expanding relationships. One of the things we've done in Georgia is that where somebody has a project of interest or value, through the Faith Forward Network, they can simply invite other pastors and laity to come and observe it, come and witness it, come and discuss it. And so to, expand and connect the work, there might be opportunities for Mr. Rollins to sort of bring other people in to see what he's doing and what the police he's working with and others are doing. And then a very challenging question on are there historical examples of where this kind of dialogue process has been successful, or this kind of civil society intervention has been successful? And excuse me if I mischaracterized that question. So that's what we were discussing before we too were cut off in mid-flow.
We should give you more time in the future, but guys, this is really important to us. We're going to capture this data. We're going to talk about it. We're going to look at ways to expand out into this. We believe that the faith community plays a major role as it plays in our society, it plays a major role because we're going to have the right conversations. Guys, we've got to get back to having conversations with one another, even when we vehemently disagree. I have a neighbor. I live on a cul-de-sac. I have a neighbor right across the street. A great guy. All right. We don't agree on politics at all. I'm talking about it's an interesting conversation. I'm not sure that we even agree on business principles. Well, that's kind of an interesting conversation. I know I can't stand his football team, the University of Miami. I'm a Florida State guy. So we don't agree on that one either. But I can tell you this, he's my friend. And when my son gets married in April out in Tahoe, he's flying out to go out there and be at our wedding. That's the conversations. We can have conversations and learn to care for one. You know, in the Jewish culture, the Shema, the says, "Hear, O Israel, God is one. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." Right? Jesus comes along and says, they said, "What's the greatest of the commandments?" He says, "To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength." Right? And then he adds this, "And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself." Sometimes people say, I can love God and I can hate you. And I think that's what we've allowed to come into our culture, where actually the second is equally responsible to have a love for our neighbor. And I won't go off into a philosophical argument, who's our neighbor, but Christ actually answered that one too. And so I think that that's the conversations that we want to have. It's not a proselytizing. It's not pushing any one person to one way or one belief. It is saying that we celebrate differences, but we have the conversation, that voice of reason. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm with I forgot whoever said, Sharon Joy. Carter Center is courageous in inviting this back into the conversation. And I really think it's important that we do have that. Tom, you did a marvelous job. I want to say for the record, you did a marvelous job. All right, we've got a couple of minutes left. And so I'm not going to go into rooms now. I'm going to open it up for you guys. Just come off of mute and talk to us.
And Kurt, maybe if I know we have at least 2 pastors on this call. Are there more than 2 pastors?
Yeah. Anybody have a comment? I'm sorry. We should have gone to that. Any comments?
Yeah.
Pastor Samuel?
There we go. Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
And thanks for the opportunity. I mean, I think that when we talk about reaching out to allies in terms of peace building, that's really important. And I think the connection between lay leaders and pastors within a congregation is very important, because pastors have a shepherding role for sure and a leadership role, and they can speak from the pulpit in a way that other people can't do. But for that to work, they have to know that they're not going to get eaten by their own flock. And I think sometimes when we speak courageously from the pulpit, we're not the ones that are going to hear the blowback from that directly. It's other people in the congregation. And we need people who have our backs within the congregation, so that when somebody says, well, Pastor Sam was running down our candidate or whatever by talking about mitigating conflict, I need to know that people in the congregation are going to say, no, that's not really what Sam was doing. He was challenging us to love our neighbor and to really look to validate and support and encourage in other settings as well. It's so easy for a church to get divided and for people to start pointing fingers at the pastor. And that's where the congregation starts to fall apart. And that's part of the reason why pastors are not always as courageous as we are called to be from the pulpit.
Very good.
And
yes.
Yeah, just very briefly, the commonality is that we're divided and this is unhealthy. And then the conversation probably needs to begin exactly as you're saying, with people you trust in very small groups. This is a problem that we're facing. What can we do about it? And then sort of expand outwards, but not addressing it is the default, and that's how somehow we need to get above it. And sort of trainings in dialogue may sound like things that may sound a little bit soft, but in fact, they provide a sort of a framework for when future problems come up. You have something of an inoculation and a way to communicate.
I could not
good.
agree more with that. We've had, I think, do we have twice on Dr. Lydia Martinez? She's a mental health counselor who happens to be a Christian therapist. But, you know, some people might think, oh, we're going to have a Christian, we're going to have a therapist on. Listen, I think everybody can benefit from therapy, but definitely everybody can benefit from hearing and listening to things that we already know. It just refocuses us. It reunites our passion to get along with others, to do the right thing. I've taken things she said and I'm like, I'm going to use this with my kids. And guess what? It worked. Like, we're having conversations instead of talking at each other, we're talking with each other. So I couldn't agree more with that, Tom. It's things that we think we know, like I know how to get along with others until I don't. And then I need reminding of those things, right?
Yeah, I would tell you that we found Dr. Lydia Martinez got some of our highest results because what she did, she came and talked to us and told us how we need to deal with things till we're interacting. We're going to go out there and get into these situations that may be conflict, but how we interact with that. And I felt we came up, actually, it was Lisa that came up with the idea. We need to bring this into the conversation. Why? Because we want to have productive conversations. We want to become people of talking to one another, working with one another again, instead of fighting. You know, I don't know, but I grow tired of watching the news at times, and I always have I watch it, and then I have some talking head tell me what I just watched, and I don't know what they said because I'm like, I didn't hear that at all. And we've got to learn that conversation, how to talk to one another. All right, now I got to move on. All right, so here's where we are. Your open mic. Think about what are some of the things you would love. We're going to take notes off of this, but what are some of the things you would like to have us look at in our lunch and learn? We're taking time, or your time, to come and be a part of this. We think is important. I want to bring the highest level of training and support. Look, if you listen to Tom's credentials, did you hear his experience? I mean, and what he's done. This is big time. This is big. We bring some good folks in to talk with us, just like Dr. Martinez, fantastic. Just like we had, well, we've had 4 or 5 key people. We've actually had key politicians that come to us. We have a guy that's going to be our is going to be heading up the State Department. It came, Marco Rubio came and spoke to us. So we want to bring different folks to come in and have conversations with them. What would you like to hear? And for this, as we close out this 2024 year, what are some of the things that might be interesting for you and others to hear? And we'll go out there and bring the right experts in to come and address the group.
Kurt, this is Martha. The only thing I was thinking about is we've talked about trying to reach agreement on things that perhaps we don't agree on. But I think if we spent some time on focusing on what these diverse groups do agree on and start building from that, and the trust that you can develop in those things that we have agreement on, might help us start working toward those, of at least understanding better what we don't agree on and accepting each other, and maybe a little bit of kindness in this world. I'm sensing as was out grocery shopping and people screaming at each other and making hand signals because somebody pulled in front of them. And I'm thinking, this is the Christmas season.
It's the most happiest time of the year.
Yeah. What is, but again, maybe, I don't know how we address this, but I still think that the people that I differ with politically, we have so much in common, and that's what we build on, is the commonality, not on the differences.
I agree. That's where you connect with others, when you find, something.
An opportunity to maybe bring some in a let me just ask this, maybe in a conversation like this, to bring different voices, but reasonable voices, having conversations, and maybe we're sitting here listening to it, sort of a voice of reason type of dialogue. Instead of one person coming in and saying, well, here's what you need to do. It's, let me tell you why we hold this position. Somebody mentioned, I'm not sure that we go down this, but somebody mentioned that I'm working to deal with gun violence in a community. And and you might have a person that comes in and says, I think gun violence is like this, but really, and somebody else comes in, well, I don't think so. And we can have that conversation. What we don't want to do is start turning into it. Remember the old show Crossfire, where they would shoot at each other and you kind of come back. I get enough of that just turning on the TV. What I am interested in is, I like that. Where do we work for commonality? Now it's going to take us a little bit of work on this, but listen, the Carter Center is an expert in trying to pull these things together. So let me pick Nathan's brain, and we'll get Jennifer and Lisa and I will sit down and try to come up with that. That's a really good suggestion. And we may do that interspersed in with some of the high level training and so forth. I still would love to hear from some of our political leaders, some of the things that they're talking about, and maybe even bringing one from the right and from the left. I notice there's a couple of television shows that are doing that, and they call it Common Ground or something like that. I wouldn't mind that. And I wouldn't mind us being listening to them and hearing them, and then even talking with them about, maybe you want to consider this as part of the Common Ground conversation, that type of thing. That's interesting. Are there other things? That was great, Martha. Fantastic.
I have a question, Kirk.
Yeah, Karen.
How are we doing outreach to bring people into this discussion? Is there something that we need to do to broaden that?
All right, 3 things, okay? And then there's about 10 things more we need to do, and we won't get into it, but 3 things. Number one, it really comes into Lisa and Jennifer and Kurt having conversations with our sphere of influence and strongly encouraging you to go out and bring 1, 2, 3, or 4 more people in. I made a group of calls today to say, hey, just remind you to be on the call. And people said, yeah, we're doing Christmas stuff. We don't have time, blah, blah, blah. I got it. Okay, got all that. But if you guys are the ones, how are you bringing people? You bring in 3 more. We ought to have we talked about the Sunshine 100. It ought to be the Sunshine 10,000, because we should be able to expand out there. So that's number one, is you're the grassroots. So that's a perfect way. And you can come and say, look, you may hear people say stuff that you don't agree with. Good. Come in. Let's have the conversation. Let's have that voice of reason where we can talk through issues, especially if we're bringing high level folks in to have these conversations. We want to make it worth your time to come to it. Number 2, we are doing social media. I hope that you are following us on our Facebook, okay? The Facebook page. Lorianne, if you can put in the information into the chat where they can get all of this for us. We put out communications through our emails and so forth. So our social media, we're trying to do a better job in that. And if we could get you to follow us on that and get people to follow us on that, that would be very helpful. That expands out fairly rapidly if we do that right. And then the third thing is, we are now trying to build out sort of groups of folks across the state that will have conversations that I may or may not be in, but we get people talking together and expanding this across the state. This was Nathan was talking about how we could do that. We're going to have a greater conversation on how the Carter Center is going to support the work here at the Sunshine 100. You set that question up for me, but that was actually perfect. And we would hope that you would help us engage this. Guys, we're about 2 minutes out. Any comment from anybody else? Anybody else have anything they need to say? Okay.
I'm just going to drop those slides in the chat for anybody who wants to pick them up, recycle them, use them yourselves.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, Tom. And again, Tom, you were fantastic. We appreciate you, brother. Appreciate your life's work and what you've done with your life. We really appreciate that. And with that, guys, we appreciate you. Please know that we don't say we love you with just sort of a tongue in cheek. We do. We love you. We love what you're doing. We love that you're involved with this, and we really appreciate it. For Lisa and myself, and of course Jennifer, who's off in Peru having a great time, we're thankful that you got on this call, and we look forward to bringing you the next one in January. We'll watch your emails and everything. If there's a better way we can communicate to you, let us know that as well. And we look forward to building this out even stronger next year. With that, I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year. All right.
Yes. Merry Christmas. We thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us.
God bless.